The blood wasn't his, but the woman screaming his name from the burning cabin was. Boone Lark dove through the smoke-thick doorway, his Colt drawn, eyes scanning for movement in the orange hell that had been his home 3 hours ago. The heat hit him like a slap, and somewhere through the crackling flames, Celia's voice cut through the chaos. Boone, he's got the children. His boots hit floorboards that groaned under the weight of destruction. This wasn't an accident. The kerosene smell was too strong, the fire too perfectly placed in three separate corners. Someone had come for him, and now the woman who'd whispered, "You're my first," just 2 nights ago might die for the mistake of loving him. He promised her she'd be his last. Now he had to make sure she'd be his always. "Where are you?" he shouted, but her voice had gone silent. Through the smoke, he caught a glimpse of movement, a man's silhouette dragging something toward the back door. Boone raised his weapon, finger on the trigger, but hesitated. What if he missed? What if Celia was in the line of fire? The shadow disappeared into the smoke, and panic clawed at his chest like nothing he'd felt since the war. 3 months earlier, the December wind cut through Boone Lark's coat like a blade as he guided his horse through the Wyoming wilderness. Snow fell thick and steady, the kind that buried everything in its path and left no room for mistakes. His sleeve was stained dark, not his blood, but he couldn't shake the feeling that more would follow. A man didn't walk away for what he'd done in Cheyenne without consequences. He just hadn't expected those consequences to find innocent people first. The broken wagon appeared through the white curtain like a ghost. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks. No one traveled this trail in winter, especially not with a storm coming. But as he rode closer, the details sharpened into something that made his stomach drop. A woman sat huddled against the wagon's side. 2 small children pressed against her for warmth. They weren't moving much. That was never a good sign. Boone pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet away, close enough to help, but far enough to run if this was some kind of trap. In his former line of work, a man learned that coincidences usually weren't. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying over the wind. "You folks need assistance?" The woman's head snapped up, and even through the snow, he could see the desperation in her eyes. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair that had escaped from whatever arrangement she'd started the day with. Pretty in the way that women were before life wore them down to nothing. The children, a boy who looked about 9 and a little girl maybe 6, stirred at the sound of his voice. "Please," she said, and the word came out like a prayer. "We've been here since yesterday. Our horse broke free during the night. I don't know which direction town is, and my children—" Her voice broke on the last word. Boone studied the scene carefully. The wagon was tilted at an odd angle, one wheel clearly busted. Their supplies were scattered in the snow, and from the look of things, they didn't have enough to last another night in the open. The woman's lips had a blue tint that he'd seen before, and the little girl wasn't shivering anymore. That was the dangerous stage when the body stopped fighting the cold. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked, still keeping his distance. "Celia Barrett. These are my children, Lyle and Lisa." She pulled him closer. Are you going to help us?" The question hit him wrong, like she expected him to ride away and leave them to freeze. Maybe other men had done that to her before. The thought made something ugly twist in his chest. "Yes, ma'am, but I need to know, is there anyone else with you? Anyone who might be coming back?" Celia's laugh was bitter as the wind. "There's no one coming back. My husband made sure of that when he took our horse and our money and disappeared 2 days ago." That explained the desperation and the fear in her eyes when she'd first seen him. A woman alone with children had good reason to be afraid of strange men, especially out here where screams didn't carry and no one asked questions about what happened to people who disappeared. "All right," Boone said, making his decision. "I've got a cabin about 3 miles north. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. I can get you there, but it'll take 3 trips. Horse can't carry all of us through this snow." The boy, Lyle, spoke up for the first time. "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Smart kid. Suspicious. That was good. It might keep him alive. Because it's the right thing to do, Boone said simply. And because no child should freeze to death while I have the power to stop it. The first trip, he took Lisa. She was the smallest, the most at risk, and she didn't fight when he lifted her onto his horse. Her little body was cold as ice through her thin coat, and she didn't speak the entire ride. Just held on tight and buried her face against his back. When they reached the cabin, he wrapped her in blankets near the fire and left her with instructions not to open the door for anyone but him. The second trip was Lyle. The boy asked questions the whole way. Where did Boone live? Was he married? Did he have children? Why was there blood on his sleeve? Boone answered what he could and deflected the rest. Some truths were too heavy for a child to carry. Celia came last. She was the hardest to move because she'd used the last of her strength keeping her children alive. She swayed in the saddle, and twice Boone had to steady her with his arm around her waist. She smelled like snow and fear and something else. Something sweet that reminded him of better times before he'd learned that good things had a way of turning bad. By the time they reached the cabin, full dark had fallen. Boone helped Celia down from the horse and felt her legs nearly give out beneath her. Without thinking, he swept her up in his arms and carried her inside. She was lighter than she should be, all sharp angles and hollow spaces where proper meals should have filled her out. The cabin was small but warm, with one main room that served as kitchen, living area, and Boone's bedroom. A ladder led up to a loft where the children could sleep. It wasn't much, but after a broken wagon in a snowstorm, it probably looked like heaven. Celia's eyes took in everything. The rifle mounted above the fireplace, the neat stack of supplies, the single chair at the small table. "You live here alone," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. And you're not expecting anyone?" "No, ma'am." But even as he said it, Boone found himself listening for sounds outside the cabin that didn't belong. Old habits, old fears. Some things followed a man, no matter how far he ran. That night, after a meal of beans and salt pork, they worked out the sleeping arrangements. The children took the loft. Celia got Boone's bed, and he made himself a bedroll by the fire. As the others settled in for the night, Boone sat cleaning his colt by lamplight. The blood on his sleeve had dried to a dark stain, and every few minutes he found himself checking the windows. Just before dawn, something moved outside the cabin. Boone was on his feet with his gun in hand before his mind fully processed what he'd heard. He moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. Snow, trees, shadows that could be anything or nothing. But somewhere morning came with weak sunlight, filtering through frost-covered windows. Boone had barely slept, spending most of the night listening for sounds that didn't belong. When he finally dozed off, he dreamed of burning cabins and women screaming his name. He woke to the smell of coffee brewing and found Celia standing by the stove, fully dressed and looking more alert than she had any right to after what she'd been through. "I hope you don't mind," she said, not looking at him directly. "I found your coffee and figured it was the least I could do." Boone sat up, automatically checking that his gun was still within reach. The movement caught her attention, and he saw her eyes flick to the weapon before meeting his gaze. "You don't have to explain yourself in your own home, ma'am. Coffee's appreciated." What he didn't say was that he'd been testing her. Most women would have asked permission first or apologized for going through his things. Celia Barrett had simply seen what needed doing and done it. That told him something about who she was underneath all that proper politeness. The children came down from the loft, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Lyle immediately went to the window, pressing his nose against the glass. "Still snowing," he announced. "How long do you think we'll have to stay?" "Hard to say," Boone replied, pouring himself coffee. "Could be days. Could be a week. Depends on how bad this storm gets." He watched Celia's face carefully as he said it. Some women would have panicked at the thought of being trapped with a strange man. But Celia just nodded like she'd expected as much. "We'll try not to be too much trouble," she said. "You're not trouble." The words came out more forcefully than he'd intended. None of you are trouble." After breakfast, Boone made a decision that surprised even him. "Mrs. Barrett," he said, "I'd like to teach you to handle a gun." Celia nearly dropped the plate she was drying. "I beg your pardon?" "Out here, a woman should know how to protect herself and her children, especially if she's planning to stay in Wyoming." He gestured toward the rifle above the fireplace. "That's not just decoration. It's a tool, same as a hammer or a cooking pot." Lyle perked up immediately. "Can I learn too?" "You're too young for a rifle," Boone said, "but I can teach you to load and clean one properly. That's important knowledge for any man to have." "I'm not sure this is appropriate," Celia began, but Boone cut her off gently. "Ma'am, with respect, appropriate went out the window when your husband left you stranded in the wilderness. The world doesn't care about appropriate. It cares about who's prepared and who's not." Something shifted in her expression. The polite mask slipped just enough for him to see the steel underneath. "You're right," she said. "When do we start?" They started that afternoon. Boone set up targets against a fallen log behind the cabin, while Celia watched with an expression that was part nervousness, part determination. He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. What he didn't expect was how natural she was at it. Her first shot went wide, but not by much. Her second grazed the edge of the target. By her fifth attempt, she was hitting center mass consistently. "You've done this before," he said, and it wasn't a question. "My father taught me when I was young," she admitted. "Before he died. Before my mother decided that ladies didn't need such skills." She lined up another shot. "I haven't held a gun in 10 years. "Well, you haven't forgotten." Boone stepped closer to adjust her stance, and suddenly he was very aware of her warmth, the way she smelled like soap and something uniquely feminine. His hands lingered on her shoulders longer than necessary. "Like this. Feel how your body wants to balance." Out there, someone was watching, and they knew exactly where to find him. She nodded, but he could see the flush creeping up her neck. When she fired again, the shot went straight through the center of the target. "Better?" she asked, turning to look at him. They were standing close enough that he could count the freckles across her nose. Close enough to see the way her breath made small clouds in the cold air. "Much better," he managed. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat by the fire talking. Celia had let her hair down, and it fell in dark waves around her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, less burdened. "You said you used to be a lawman," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "What made you stop?" Boone stared into the flames for a long moment. "I stopped believing that justice and law were the same thing. Started caring more about doing what was right than doing what was legal." He glanced at her. "That's a dangerous way for a lawman to think. Is that why there was blood on your sleeve when you found us?" The question hung in the air between them. Boone had wondered when she'd ask about that. A man in Cheyenne was beating his wife. Badly. The law said it was a domestic matter, not my concern. I disagreed. And now that man won't be beating anyone again. And I'm not welcome in Cheyenne. He met her eyes. "Does that frighten you?" Celia considered this for a moment. "It should," she said finally, "but it doesn't. My husband never laid a hand on me, but he hurt me in other ways. Left me feeling like I was worth nothing more than what I could do for him. A man who'd fight for someone else's wife." She trailed off, then added quietly, "That's the kind of man who understands what women are really worth." Something passed between them then, an understanding that went deeper than words. Boone felt the walls he'd built around his heart crack just slightly. This woman saw him. Not the reputation, not the gun, not the blood on his hands, but him. "I should check the horses," he said, standing abruptly. The moment felt too intense, too dangerous. He learned not to trust feelings like this. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the wind was still bitter. Boone made his way to the small lean-to, where he kept his horse, checking automatically for signs that anyone had been near the cabin while they were inside. The snow around the building was undisturbed, but something felt wrong. That same prickle at the back of his neck that had kept him alive through 2 wars and 5 years as a lawman. He was walking back toward the cabin when he saw them, boot prints in the snow near the tree line. Fresh prints, made sometime in the last few hours. Someone had been watching the cabin, watching them. Boone's hand moved instinctively to his gun as he knelt to examine the tracks more closely. A single rider, from the look of it. Someone who'd stayed just far enough back to avoid being seen from the windows, but close enough to observe everything that went on around the cabin. The prints led back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness between the trees. Whoever it was, they were gone now, but they'd be back. Men who watched from shadows always came back. When Boone returned to the cabin, Celia looked up from the book she was reading. "Everything all right?" she asked. He forced himself to smile. "Just checking on the horse. All quiet out there." But as he settled back down by the fire, cleaning his colt with practiced efficiency, Boone couldn't shake the feeling that their time of peace was running out. Someone had found them. Someone knew exactly where they were. And come morning, he was going to have to decide whether to run or make a stand. 3 weeks had passed since the storm, but Celia and the children remained at the cabin. What had started as temporary shelter was becoming something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to home. Boone told himself it was practical. The spring thaw made travel difficult, and the children were thriving under his care. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He didn't want them to leave. "Help me with the garden plot," Celia said one morning, holding a small packet of seeds. "I found these in my wagon supplies." Boone looked at the seeds, carrots, beans, squash, and felt something twist in his chest. Gardens were permanent things. Gardens meant staying. "You planning to be here come harvest time?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Celia met his eyes directly. "Are you asking me to stay?" The question hung between them like smoke from a campfire, impossible to ignore. Before Boone could answer, Lyle came running around the corner of the cabin, his face pale with excitement and fear. "Boone, there's someone in the woods watching us." I saw him from the loft window. Boone's blood went cold. He'd found more tracks over the past weeks, always in different spots, always just far enough away to avoid detection. Someone was definitely keeping tabs on them, and his patience was running out. "Take the children inside," Boone told Celia, his voice sharp with command. "Bar the door. Don't open it unless you hear my voice." But when he reached the tree line where Lyle had pointed, there was nothing, just disturbed snow and the lingering sense that eyes had been watching. On the ground near an oak tree, someone had left something that made Boone's stomach drop, a playing card, the ace of spades, with a hole shot clean through the center. A calling card, a message. Someone from his past had found him. That evening, after the children were asleep, Celia confronted him. "You know who's out there, don't you?" Boone sat at the table, cleaning his gun for the 3rd time that day. A man named Caleb Morse. I sent him to prison 5 years ago for murdering a family outside Laramie. He got out 6 months ago, and now he's come for you. Seems that way. Boone looked up at her. "Which is why you and the children need to leave. Tomorrow morning, I'll pack supplies, give you directions to the nearest town." Celia's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Just like that? Pack up and leave." "It's not safe here anymore, Celia. This man, he's not like your husband. He won't just take what he wants and disappear. He'll burn everything down just to watch it burn. And what about you?" "I'll handle Morse. Alone. That's how I work best." Celia stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "No," she said, her voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. "I won't be abandoned again. Not by another man who thinks he knows what's best for me. This isn't about abandoning you, isn't it?" She moved closer, her eyes blazing. "You want to send me away because it's easier than admitting you care about me. Easier than fighting for something good instead of just fighting against something bad." Boone set down his gun and looked at her, really looked at her. Somewhere over the past weeks, the fragile woman he'd rescued had transformed into something fierce and beautiful and completely unafraid. "Celia, you want to know something?" she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You're my first. Your first what? My first everything that matters." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used to wash her hair. First man to see me as more than what I can do for him. First man to teach me I'm worth protecting. First man to make me feel like I'm worth fighting for. The words hit him like a physical blow. Boone stood up slowly, his hands finding her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheek. Celia, you don't understand. I'm not a good man. The things I've done. You're good to me, she said simply. You're good to my children. That's all the good I need. When he kissed her, it was with 5 years of loneliness and 3 weeks of wanting and the desperate knowledge that this might be their only chance. She kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. Promise me something, he said against her lips. Anything. If we get through this, if we survive whatever's coming, you'll be my last. Your last what? My last everything. Last woman I'll ever need to love. Last chance I'll ever take at happiness. Last promise I'll ever make that I mean to keep. Before she could answer, a sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling the cabin like a predator testing for weakness. Caleb Morse had stopped watching. Now he was ready to play. The footsteps circled the cabin twice before fading into the night. Boone stood at the window with his rifle, watching the darkness until dawn broke gray and cold over the mountains. Morse was playing games, testing their nerves, letting fear do half his work for him. It was exactly what Boone had expected from a man who'd murdered an entire family just to make a point. He's gone, Celia said from behind him. For now. Boone didn't lower the rifle. But he'll be back. Tonight, maybe tomorrow. And when he comes, it won't be to talk. The next 3 days were the strangest of Boone's life. During the daylight hours, he turned his home into a fortress. He taught Celia not just how to shoot, but how to shoot to kill. He showed Lyle how to reload quickly under pressure and where to position himself for the best defensive angles. Even little Lisa learned to recognize the sound of trouble and how to hide in the root cellar beneath the cabin floor. Like a game, Boone told her, making it sound fun instead of terrifying. When you hear the signal, you hide until someone comes to find you. Can you do that? Lisa nodded solemnly. What if the bad man finds me first? He won't. Boone promised and meant it. Whatever else happened, that little girl would survive this. But in the evenings, after the preparations were finished and the weapons were cleaned and ready, something extraordinary happened. They became a family. Celia would cook dinner while humming softly under her breath. Lyle would practice his letters by the firelight. Lisa would curl up in Boone's lap and make him tell stories about his adventures as a lawman, carefully edited for young ears. You're good with them, Celia observed one night after the children had gone to bed. They're good kids. Boone poured himself a cup of coffee, noting absently that his hands weren't quite steady. The waiting was harder than the fighting would be. Boone. Celia's voice was soft, uncertain. After this is over, after Morse is gone, what happens to us? The question he'd been dreading. Boone set down his cup and really looked at her. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a desperate woman with nothing but 2 children and the clothes on her back. Now she was the center of everything good in his world, and the thought of losing her made his chest tight with panic. What do you want to happen? He asked. All we've been pretending we have. I want to wake up in this cabin every morning for the rest of my life. I want to watch Lyle grow into a man who's proud of his father. I want to give Lisa the kind of childhood where she never doubts she's safe and loved. She paused, then added quietly, I want to be your wife. The words hit him like a physical blow. Celia, is that what you want too? Boone crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms. More than I've ever wanted anything in my life, he said against her hair. But I need to know you understand what you be getting. I'm not an easy man to love. I have enemies. I have blood on my hands that will never wash clean. There will always be men like Morse who want to settle old scores. And there will always be women like me who need men like you to fight for them. She pulled back to meet his eyes. You think I don't know what love costs? You think I haven't counted the price? I lost 1 husband to cowardice. I won't lose another to fear. Then marry me, he said, the words coming out in a rush. If we survive this, if we're still alive when the sun comes up tomorrow, marry me. Celia's smile was bright enough to light the whole cabin. I thought you'd never ask. I thought I'd never deserve to. She kissed him in, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she whispered, "You deserve every good thing, Boone Lark, even if you don't believe it yet." That night they made plans, where they'd hold the ceremony, what they'd name the children when Boone adopted them legally, how they'd expand the cabin to make room for the family they were becoming. For a few precious hours, they let themselves believe in a future where love was stronger than vengeance. Just before dawn, the sound of horses broke the peaceful silence. Multiple riders, approaching from 3 different directions. Morse hadn't come alone. Boone was already reaching for his gun when the first torch sailed through the window. The cabin erupted in flames, and their quiet life together shattered like glass. The burning cabin surrounded Boone like the mouth of hell itself. Smoke filled his lungs as he moved through rooms that had been his sanctuary just minutes before. The flames crackled and roared, consuming everything he'd built, everything that had mattered. But somewhere in this inferno was the woman he loved, and he'd walk through hell itself to reach her. "Celia," he shouted, his voice raw from smoke. The heat pressed against him like a living thing, and sweat poured down his face despite the cool night air outside. "Here." Her voice came from the back room, strong and clear. Not the voice of a victim, but of a fighter. "The children are safe." Relief flooded through him. Their plan had worked. At the first sign of trouble, Lisa and Lyle had dropped through the hidden trapdoor into the root cellar, where they'd be protected by earth and stone until this was over. Celia had made sure of it before taking her position. Boone pushed through the smoke toward her voice and found her crouched behind his overturned bed, his spare rifle in her hands. Her dress was singed and her hair had come loose, but her eyes were sharp and focused. She looked like a warrior goddess in the firelight. "How many?" he asked, dropping down beside her. 3 men. Morse and 2 others. "They're trying to flush us out." She handed him a cartridge belt. "I counted their shots. Morse is carrying a repeater, but the others have single-shot rifles." Boone felt a surge of fierce pride. This was his woman, his partner. Not cowering in fear, but analyzing the threat and preparing to fight. "Where's Morse now?" "Kitchen. He's been calling for you to come out and face him like a man." Celia's mouth twisted in disgust. Like burning down a house with children inside is the act of a man. Through the smoke and flames, Boone heard Morse's voice, rough and mocking. "Lark, you in there, you coward? Come out and finish what you started 5 years ago. You finished it when you murdered that family." Boone shouted back, "I just made sure you paid for it. Prison was payment enough. This here's interest." A gunshot shattered what remained of the kitchen window. Morse was getting impatient, which meant he was getting careless. That was good. Careful men lived longer, but careless men made mistakes. "Listen to me," Boone said to Celia, speaking fast. "In about 30 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, you get to that window and cover me." "Can you do that?" "I can do that." She checked her rifle, chambering around with practiced efficiency. "What kind of distraction?" "The permanent kind." Before she could protest, Boone was moving. He burst from the back room like an avenging angel, his Colt blazing. The first shot took down one of Morse's men before the outlaw could react. The second sent the other diving for cover behind the kitchen table. Morse spun toward him, his face twisted with 5 years of hatred and prison rage. "There you are, you self-righteous son of a..." Boone's third shot cut off the insult and sent Morse stumbling backward. Blood bloomed across the outlaw's shirt, but he didn't go down. Instead, he raised his rifle with hands that shook from pain and fury. That's when Celia's shot rang out from the window. Morse's rifle spun from his hands as her bullet shattered his wrist. He screamed and dropped to his knees, clutching his ruined hand. "The family you killed," Boone said, walking closer, his gun trained on Morse's head. "They had children, a little girl about the same age as Lisa. Did she scream when you shot her?" Morse looked up at him with eyes full of hate and pain. "She screamed real pretty, just like your woman's gonna scream when I—" Boone's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. One squeeze, and Caleb Morse would never threaten another innocent person, never burn another home, never make another child scream. But through the smoke and flames, he could hear Celia's voice calling his name, not in fear or panic, but in love, in hope for their future together, a future that couldn't be built on vengeance, no matter how justified. "Sheriff's on his way," Boone said instead, holstering his weapon. "You can explain to him why you thought burning down a house was a good idea." The remaining outlaw threw down his gun and raised his hands. "I surrender. Don't shoot. Smart man," Celia said, emerging from the smoke with her rifle still ready. "Though you picked poor company." Outside, the sound of approaching horses filled the night air. Help was coming. The fire was spreading, but they were alive. All of them were alive. Boone pulled Celia into his arms as the cabin burned around them, feeling her heart beat against his chest. They'd lost their home, but they'd saved what mattered most: each other. 6 months later, the sound of hammering filled the morning air as Boone and Lyle worked on the final wall of their new cabin. The boy had grown 3 inches over the summer and developed muscles in his arms from all the construction work. More importantly, he'd started calling Boone Pa, without even seeming to realize he was doing it. "Hand me that crossbeam," Boone said, wiping sweat from his forehead. The new cabin was going to be twice the size of the old one, with a proper bedroom for him and Celia, separate rooms for the children, and a kitchen large enough for the family meals that had become the center of their world. This one, Lyle hefted a thick piece of pine that would have been too heavy for him 6 months ago. "That's the one. You're getting strong, son." The words slipped out naturally, the way it had been doing for weeks now. Lyle grinned and climbed up the ladder to help position the beam. Below them, Lisa sat in the shade, braiding wildflowers into chains, while Celia hung laundry on the line they'd strung between 2 oak trees. It was a picture of domestic peace that Boone had never imagined for himself. For 34 years, he'd lived as a solitary man, trusting no one completely, building nothing that couldn't be abandoned at a moment's notice. Now he was putting down roots so deep that nothing short of an earthquake could shake them loose. "Boone," Celia called from the laundry line. "The minister's coming up the road." Reverend Matthews rode into their clearing on his old bay mare, his black coat dusty from the long ride from town. He was a thin, serious man who'd agreed to perform the ceremony despite the unconventional circumstances. In his saddlebags, he carried the legal papers that would make everything official: the marriage license, the adoption papers that would give Lyle and Lisa the Lark name, and a deed to the land that Boone had purchased from the territorial government. "Morning, Reverend," Boone called down from the roof. "You're right on time." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Matthews replied, dismounting with the careful movements of a man who'd spent too many years in the saddle. "Though I have to say, this is the first wedding I've ever performed in a construction site. We wanted to start our marriage in our new home," Celia said, smoothing down her dress. It was the same blue gingham she'd been wearing the day Boone found her, but she'd taken it apart and remade it completely. Like everything else in their lives, it was familiar but transformed, made better by love and careful attention. Other guests began arriving as the morning wore on. Sheriff Morrison came from town, the man who'd arrested Caleb Morse and his surviving partner. The outlaws were now serving 20-year sentences for arson and attempted murder, and Morrison had made it clear that any other enemies from Boone's past would receive the same treatment. Mrs. Henley arrived with her 3 daughters, the family who ran the general store in town. They'd become fast friends with Celia, and the older girls had spent hours teaching Lisa how to braid her hair in the latest fashion. Even old Pete Garrison rode out from his ranch, bringing a wedding gift of 2 milk cows and a bull. Figure you'll be needing your own herd soon enough, Pete said with a wink that made Celia blush prettily. By noon, the clearing was filled with neighbors and friends, people who'd accepted this unusual family without question. It was more than Boone had dared hope for when he'd first decided to stay in Wyoming territory. He'd found not just love, but community. Not just a wife, but a place to belong. Reverend Matthews positioned himself under the largest oak tree, his Bible open in his hands. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice carrying easily across the gathered crowd. We are here today to witness the union of Boone Lark and Celia Barrett in holy matrimony. Boone felt his throat tighten as he looked at the woman standing beside him. She'd woven wildflowers into her dark hair, and her eyes sparkled with joy and unshed tears. In her hands, she held a small bouquet of the same flowers Lisa had been braiding all morning. Marriage, the minister continued, is not just the joining of two people, but the creation of something entirely new. A partnership that is stronger than the sum of its parts. A family built on love, trust, and mutual respect. The words seemed to float over Boone like a blessing. 6 months ago, he'd been a man with nothing to lose because he'd never allowed himself to have anything worth losing. Now he had everything. A wife who was his equal in courage and determination. Children who looked at him with trust and affection. A home that represented permanence and peace. Boone, the minister said, "Do you take Celia to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, honor her, protect her, and stand by her side through whatever trials life may bring?" "I do," Boone said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "More than that, I promise to deserve her love every single day for the rest of my life." Celia's smile was bright enough to outshine the summer sun. When the minister asked her the same question, her answer came without hesitation. "I do, and I promise to be his partner in all things, his equal in courage, his comfort in sorrow, and his joy in celebration. I promise to build a love with him that will last until the stars burn out." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that Boone had ordered from the jeweler in Cheyenne. As he slipped the ring on Celia's finger, she whispered the words that had become their private vow. "You're my first," she said, so quietly that only he could hear. "And you're my last," he whispered back. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming," Reverend Matthews announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Lyle hooped like a cowboy, and Lisa threw her flower chains into the air. But for Boone, the world had narrowed to just himself and the woman in his arms, the woman who would share his name and his life and his future. After the ceremony, Mrs. Henley and the other women served dinner on tables made from sawhorses and planks. There was roast beef and fresh bread, green beans from Celia's garden, and 3 different kinds of pie. The men passed around a bottle of whiskey, toasting the bride and groom with enthusiasm that grew louder with each drink. As the sun began to set, the guests started making their way home. Sheriff Morrison was the last to leave, shaking Boone's hand with genuine warmth. "You picked a good woman, Lark," he said, "and from what I hear, she can outshoot half the men in the territory." "She can outshoot me," Boone admitted. "Good thing we're on the same side." As the sheriff rode away, Boone looked around at what they'd accomplished. The cabin was nearly finished, just a few more days of work before they could move in permanently. Celia's garden was thriving, promising a good harvest come fall. The children were healthy and happy and secure in their new life. "No regrets?" Celia asked, slipping her hand into his as they watched the last of their guests disappear down the road. "Only one," Boone said. She looked at him in surprise, and he smiled. "I regret that it took me so long to find you." That night, they slept under the stars one last time in the temporary shelter they'd built while working on a new cabin. The children were exhausted from the excitement and fell asleep immediately, but Boone and Celia lay awake talking quietly about their plans. "I want to add a workshop to the back of the house," Boone said, his arm around his wife as she nestled against his chest. Teach Lyle carpentry and metalwork. A man should know how to build things with his hands. And I want to plant an herb garden, Celia replied. Mrs. Henley says there's good money in medicinal plants, and I'd like to help other women the way you helped me. We'll build it all, Boone promised. Whatever you want, whatever makes you happy. I'm already happy, she said, tilting her head up to look at him. Happier than I ever thought possible. 3 months later, the new cabin was complete, and Celia was pregnant with their first child together. Lyle had started calling himself Lyle Lark without prompting, and Lisa had announced to anyone who would listen that she was going to be the best big sister in all of Wyoming territory. The workshop was finished too, and Boone had started taking orders for custom furniture from families in town. His reputation had spread, and people came from as far as Denver to commission pieces from a man who could build anything and make it beautiful. On their first anniversary, Boone and Celia sat on the porch of their completed home, watching Lyle teach his little sister how to whittle while the baby kicked actively in Celia's growing belly. Remember what you said about love? Celia asked, her hand resting on her stomach. Which part? That it isn't something you find. It's something you build. Boone looked around at everything they'd created together. The house, the garden, the family, the life that neither of them could have imagined a year before. Looks like we built something pretty good, he said. The best, Celia agreed, reaching for his hand. And we're just getting started. As the sun set over their Wyoming home, Boone Lark smiled and held his wife close. He'd spent most of his life running from the past, but now he was running towards something infinitely better. A future filled with love, laughter, and the kind of happiness that could only be built one day, one choice, one moment at a time. Love wasn't something you found. Love was something you built to last forever.